Hi, I'm Fidel Master Livy Cherbulenko, and in this series I analyze the openings of people rated anywhere between 8,000 and 2,000. The following is a chess.com game played between 1931 versus 1906. Let's start. Alright, so e4, c5, okay, so black plays the Sicilian defense. Pawn to c3, this is called the Alapin variation. The point is that white wants to play d4, and when black takes back with a pawn, white can go cd, taking back on d4 with a pawn, thus controlling the key central squares. That's different from, let's say, knight f3, for example, d6, d4, cd, and knight d4. Yeah, we have a piece in the center, but for example, when black, let's say, eventually plays like, let's say, like knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, there is no like real pressure on our c6 knight, right? Like it's just pieces of the same value. Versus, let's say here, if let's say black plays knight c6, d4 here, let's say d6 or something, and white goes d5, this is a real threat. That's why a pawn in the center is stronger than a piece in the center. So that's the point of c3, to control the center with the pawns ideally. Okay, b6, okay, this already is the first inaccuracy. It's too slow. It's a corner pawn move, which in the opening we don't make corner pawn moves. There are exceptions, okay, but it has to make sense. Here it doesn't make much sense. That's one. Two, we prioritize in this case the development of a queenside bishop, which should not be our number one priority. Our priority should be the kingside bishop, right? Kingside minor pieces, so that we can castle quicker. After we, castled and stuff, then we can think about the queenside bishop. We can think about it later, but it's not our number one priority. In the opening is development first, king safety first, and then think about the other bishop, all right? So what I would do is I just go d5. This is like another thing. When white plays not the most active moves, yeah, I know, they want to play d4 and stuff, but this is a pawn move. They don't develop the knight and the bishop and stuff, right? It is a little bit slower move. When they play a little bit slower moves, you want to play explosively in the center, right? So I'd go d5. I'd go d5. So now obviously we can play here, because I can just take, and black is fine. So we have to basically take on d5. Then I would take. Then they go d4, right? Then you can take now or later. You can, maybe like play here, they go here, maybe go knight c6, put some more pressure. Let's say they develop. Now if you want, you can take, they take, then go e6. Let's say they attack the queen with a knight on c3. Okay, just move the queen away here, it's fine. Let's say castles, just bishop e7. Whatever move, just castles. And next you'd go b6, bishop b7, thank you to the bishop, rook h to c8, rook f to d8. I have a typical Isolani position where this pawn is weak and the square right in front of it is also weak. So d5 is a great outpost, especially for your knights. So you could play like knight d5, or you could play knight b4 to d5. Also your bishop on b7 would put great pressure on this long light diagonal, okay? So it's completely fine. So this is what I would do. Another move would be knight f6, another move, right? This way again d4 doesn't work, because we can like just take, right? So it forces e5, knight d5, d4. This is a whole another story. cd here, and then we can play like this, d6, bishop e7, and black is fine. But this is what I would do. A central move, and actually there's also other moves, e6, we also have obviously, and then like d5, right? White goes d4, but we can play d5, is also like fine. Let's say d4, d5, also fine. And actually there's also another thing you could do. You could play, let's say, d6, d4, cd, and then you could play g6, paying out of this bishop to put pressure. This is another rule in chess, a bit more advanced. Yeah, you give up the center, but then you attack it from the flanks. This is like modern chess. In the past we were like, oh, you have to always control the center. But modern chess is like, you can give up the center, seemingly, but then you attack it from the side. So if you just give up the center, do nothing about it, it's an asset. But if you put pressure on it, it can be a liability for white. We have to maintain this center, we have to keep it, So for example, we go knight f3, bishop g7, let's say knight c3, you could play knight f6, let's say bishop e2, we develop. Okay, castles. You could, by the way, play bishop g4, because the knight guards the d4 pawn. So if you wanted, you could go like bishop g4, take this knight, which is the defender of this key pawn, also then go knight to c6, put even more pressure on this d4 pawn, and then move the knight from f6 to d7 to open up this bishop. This is a typical idea, because this bishop you don't necessarily always need. So you exchange, you get rid of his guardian of a knight on f3, you play knight c6, you play knight f6 to d7, and you put pressure. Maybe even potentially queen b6 you could play, pressuring even more of a d4 pawn, and if this bishop ever moves, you also pressure the b2 pawn from b6 with a queen. So at some point, white would have to play d5 at some point, but that would prolong the diagonal of your bishop, right, enlarge its scope, and also weaken the dark squares. Like if white plays pawn to d5, then the e5 square becomes weak and the c5 square becomes weak. So your knight from d7 could eventually go to e5 or to c5, right? Your bishop would control the long diagonal, your knight would go to a great dark square. Also, white would lose flexibility. Like ideally, when you have this kind of pawns, d4 and e4, you wanna always make a pawn break. So ideally, white would like to maybe at some point play pawn e5, let's say, right? Pawn break, or at least keep it as it is. Usually you do not want to move the pawn to d5, because you lose pawn mobility, you lose pawn flexibility, you weaken the dark squares. But this is what you can do with like bishop g4. Or if they don't allow it, let's say they go h3, let's say knight c6 and castles. If they don't allow bishop g4 is also fine. There are also other ideas. One, you could think out of a bishop like this, here, bishop b7, rook c8, and also good, right? Bishop on b7 will eventually put pressure on e4, rook on c8, pressure on the c file. This knight from c6 could eventually move to a5 and then to c4. Typical good square in the Sicilian. You always want to put a knight on c4 and have great pressure. Another idea could be to maybe put your knight on b6, right? To open up your bishop here, and then either immediately on b6, and then bishop d7, rook c8, or maybe first a6, pawn b5, then put the knight on b6 behind the pawn. It's usually better to have the knight behind the pawns, okay, not in front of them. Right, knight b6, bishop d7, and then rook c8. And again, the point is you open up the g7 bishop, and you put pressure on the d4 pawn. These knights are the Grunfeld knights. If you know the Grunfeld defense, these are the Grunfeld knights. The point is you put the knight where the action is, which is the queen side, even if this bishop ever moves somewhere, the knight could potentially go to like c4, attack b2. Okay, what else? I mean, you could also obviously put your bishop on d7, also fine, and bring rook to c8, also fine. You could also simply play knight d7 and then queen b6, like I mentioned earlier, pressure b2, pressure d4, also fine. And finally, you could play e5, very interesting move. The point being so that you put pressure on the d4 pawn. If they take, you just take, and you're just fine, just bishop e6, and you have no problems. But if white plays d5, then you go knight e7, and suddenly we have a king side, the king side Indian attack, right? The kid, it's called, the abbreviation, the kid. So the point is that now we would attack the king side, like when we have a closed pawn structure, we should attack on the side. If it's closed, we should attack on the side. So the idea would be to go like, h6, move a knight either here or here or here, and then play f5, and then play... so by the way, why do we play h6? You have to play h6 before you play f5. Why? Because if you play f5 without playing h6, then when you play f5, you weaken the e6 square. So if you play f5 without h6, white would play knight g5 over knight e6. You do not want to allow knight g5, knight e6. So that's why it's key that before you play f5, you always play first h6. So you play h6, move a knight somewhere, then you play f5, then you play f4, and then you play g5, so basically pawn storm. And then you can move the knight back to f6, right? And basically you go for g4. You pawn storm white on the king side, on the g file. You could then play, maybe bring the rook to g8 and stuff, right? To the g file, and so attack him on the king side. Okay. And by the way, if white were to take on f5, like when you play f5, if white takes, you have to take back always with a pawn, not a piece. If you take with a piece on f5, then the e4 square will be, like, imagine if you have a piece on f5 and there is no more. So for example, I'll just show you. Let's just make a random move. Then the e4 square becomes weak, and we play knight e4, and it's a great outpost for them, and you can never attack this knight with a pawn. So it's a great forever knight, they can reinforce it and stuff, right? It's a great knight, but put pressure on the d6 pawn. And also there's no more attack, there's no more pawn storm. So we have to always take gf. There are exceptions, but most of the time, 90% of the time, we take the pawn. This way, one, we do not give them this e4 outpost, but two, we have mobility of pawns. We can like push e4, right? It's like you can make pawn breaks, and it's mobile, it's dynamic. You know, you could also like play f4, open up this bishop, fix the g2 pawn, right? Fix the g2 pawn, and then play like king h8, rook g8, pressure on the g2 pawn. You could play e4, like I said, in the center, open up this bishop. You could simply keep the pawns as they are and play rook h8. I'm sorry, king h8, rook g8, and pressure on the g file, right? Pressure the king. The point is you control more stuff. It's more dynamic, more mobile, more controlling. Okay, so this is very key. So as you can see, lots of opportunities here for black, but definitely not b6. b6, of course, is inaccurate. It's too slow. Knight f3, not the best move. It looks normal, but white has to apply prophylactic thinking. Obviously, the point is to play bishop b7. But when we play bishop b7, we do not want to play pawn d3. That's not why we played c3. We want to play d4. But here d4, black just takes on e4. So like white would have to play d3, but then it kills the purpose of c3. So we should apply prophylactic thinking. And there's another rule. If your opponent allows you, you want to have 2 pawns in the center. Like if they stop it, okay, you have 1 pawn, then develop a minor piece. But if they allow it, put 1 more pawn in the center, put 2 pawns in the center, then develop your minor pieces. Okay, so in this case it would be d4. Now what would be the point of d4? The point is that if black plays bishop b7, now that we have a pawn on d4, we can develop a bishop and put it behind the pawn, right? Because we don't want to have it in front of the pawn, that's weird, but you want to put it behind the pawn. And now, and if they attack it again with a knight, okay, just queen e2, and then you can play knight f3 here, castle, maybe knight bd2, eventually maybe push e5, you know, with good play for white, right? But yeah, d4 and bishop d3 with advantage for white. So this would have been the best move for white. But okay, let's see, knight f3, bishop b7, okay, makes sense. Yeah, pawn to d3. Wait, actually play d3. Yeah, see? Because they don't have a time to play d4. So it killed the purpose. And now already white is nothing special for white. It's nothing special for white. Okay, knight f6. Okay. e5. See, now this is interesting. d3 and e5 don't go well together. d3 and e5. What was the point of d3? The point of d3 is to defend the pawn on e4. We have a pawn on e4, we defend it. Now, when you go e5, one, there's no more pawn to defend, so now there's no more point to the d3 move, because the whole point of d3 was to defend the e4 pawn, but now there's no more pawn on e4. One. Two, after e5, let's see, black play knight d5, now white will have to play d4 to strengthen this pawn, but they already played d3, so it comes with a loss of a tempo. They actually play d4, yeah, so they lose a tempo. So you have to choose. You either play, I don't know, maybe let's say e5 immediately, for example, and then you play d5, right, in one go, I'm sorry, d4 in one go, or you play d3 and you stick to it, at least for now. But you don't play d3, and then you play e5, and then again you play d4, you just lost a tempo. By the way, another idea white could have tried, it looks kind of weird, but sometimes it is an interesting idea. Bishop d3, yes, we put it in front of a pawn, but the point is, let's say knight f6, queen e2, the point is that eventually white would play bishop to c2, castle, and then play pawn to d4, and the bishop on c2, yeah, is basically c2 or d3 is all the same. It's just that white maybe loses like one tempo. But they play, you know, d4 and have a bishop on c2, and then we can play e5. So this is also a typical idea sometimes, just so you know. Bishop d3, bishop c2, and then pawn to d4. Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just lose a tempo. Okay. e6. Okay, yeah, e6. I guess it's okay. Okay. Bishop to e2. Haha, it's too slow. They play too slow. they just played d4. After d4, this diagonal just opened up. So we should put the bishop on d3, more active, to attack h7, because black king will soon castle, and we have to attack h7. Another rule of thumb: when you have a pawn on e5, that's an attacking position. That's an attacking stance. That means you should attack on the king side. That specifically means you should attack on the king side. Why? Because when you have a pawn on e5, that means there's no knight on f6, because, I mean, it's take. If there is no knight on f6, it means h7 is weak. The knight on f6 is black's main defender most of the time. Without the knight on f6, h7 is very weak. Which means that whenever you have a pawn on e5, you should attack on the king side, and specifically h7. So white should have played bishop d3. And then, if black is not careful, so for example, I'll show you like a sample. Let's say black just goes, I'll show you like a sample. Let's say bishop e7. White has this idea of h4 even, potentially. Okay, a typical idea. When you have a pawn on e5, very typical to play h4. Remember this tandem, pawn e5 with pawn h4. The point is what? Our whole point when we have an e5 pawn is to attack h7. For that, we would need a knight on g5, but it's guarded by the bishop. It's guarded. So we need to control g5. So we go h4 to allow for knight g5. And now if black is not careful, if black castles, it has bishop h7. Check. This is called the Greek gift. Greek gift sacrifice. White sacks the bishop. King h7, knight g5, check. Let's say king g8, queen h5. Threatening here. Checkmate. If rook moves, I mean, it's just checkmate anyway. And if we take, we go hg. Oops. Threatening queen h8. Checkmate. Black has to go f5, right? Create a window, but then just g6. And then queen h8. Unstoppable. Checkmate. You know? And like if they take, well, it's all the same. It's check. King here, here, and it's basically checkmate, right? f5, g6, and then checkmate. Okay, so you see the power of h4. Very strong idea with h4. You know, and if black plays h6, well, that's a pawn hook. That's a weakening. You know, like if black ever plays h6, 7 castles, that would be maybe potential sacrifice of a bishop, or white, or white could still play. Let's say, for example, whose move? Our makes just some random move. White could even just go like this, you know. And if black ever takes, we open up the file, and the queen is coming, and basically just checkmate. Do you see? So white can just stack the knight like this. It's completely fine. There's also ideas like rook lift, pressure here, threatening this. You know, there's so much stuff, right? But this is how you should do it, right? Not bishop e2. It is way too slow. It is way too slow. So when you have a pawn on e5, think about h4, attack on the king side. Okay, knight to c6. Knight to c6, okay, castles. Queen c7. Yeah, because now obviously already h4 is not as strong. Without a bishop on d3, already doesn't work. So it makes sense to castle, yeah. Okay, queen c7 I don't like. This is not number one priority. We should focus on castling our king as fast as possible, develop minor pieces and castle our king as fast as possible, not the queen. The queen is the last piece you think about in the opening. It's like the last piece is not number one priority. Why was it so key for black to play right now queen c7? There's no point. It's not so urgent. What's the urgency? Plus, we should also apply prophylactic thinking. We should apply prophylactic thinking. What do you think white's gonna do next? If you're not careful, white could play c4 and d5 and seize the center. c4, d5, and just steamroll us. So if we know that, we can apply prophylactic thinking and we can prevent it. How? Very easy. Just take. We can just take. To make sure we can never play c4, we take, they take. And now another rule of thumb. We have to make pawn breaks through the center. Never just leave your opponent's pawn center unchallenged. We have to always make, because it's too strong. I showed you what can happen with such a center. We have to make pawn breaks through the center. So black would just play d6. Either now, or if they don't want to play now, they could play bishop e7 first, you know, and castle, and then d6, or bishop e7, d6, and then castle, right? So they could play like this first, develop the bishop first, and then play d6, or immediately d6, then bishop e7, you know, something like this. But they have to, at some point, play d6 to challenge the center, you know, to challenge the center. Otherwise, it's too strong. Even if white doesn't take, well, we'll take at some point, let's say. Oops. and then the e5 pawn will become weaker because it will no longer be defended by the d4 pawn. It will become weaker. Then eventually in the future, after we've castled and stuff, then queen c7 will make more sense because we'll actually put real pressure on the e5 pawn, which won't be guarded by the d4 pawn anymore. But if white takes, well then, I mean, they just help us develop the bishop with tempo, and now the d4 pawn is weak, isolani, right? Isolated pawn. And black has no problems. Without a pawn on e5, there's no like such a strong attack on the king side. It's not so strong. Plus the bishop is on neutral, so there's no real attack on the king side. So black's completely fine. But this is what black should have done. Apply prophylactic thinking, seeing this threat of c4 or d5, and developing quickly on the king side, castling and making a pawn break. This would be the three principles black should have applied. Instead they play queen c7, of course. Horrible move. Horrendous move. Let's see, rook e1 is okay, but I mean, it might be too slow. I mean, c4 I think would have been not bad, yeah? Yeah, c4. Attacking the knight. Let's say the knight moves. I mean, white could even play a3 and make black have his knight in the corner. Yeah, why not? I guess makes sense. And then d5, although maybe d5, there's knight e5, actually not so easy, knight e5. Knight e5, okay, and maybe e5 here also knight. There's knight e5. Okay, so yeah, so we can't play d5 yet. So black is lucky white cannot play d5 yet, because if white could play d5, it would be just over. So okay, so rook e1, yeah, it does make some sense because it will eventually guard the e5 pawn. Alright, but black has to play. Still queen c7 is not good. Even so, queen c7 is not good. Eventually it will be good at some point maybe. But still much more important was, like I said, to play cd, to play bishop e7, to castle, to play d6. Much more important than queen c7. Still black ignores all of these things, key things. Okay, bishop e7. So they develop. Okay. So now white plays c4. And by the way, see bishop e7. Another thing, black has some weak dark squares. So maybe, and especially now the queen is not on d8, not guarding g5 as well anymore. White has this bishop g5 idea. See, and then the point is that they exchange, and then we'll have weak dark squares, And then white could play like knight e4, and then knight d6, let's say like here. We make whatever move, and then knight d6, right? And it's a pretty good knight on d6. Great outpost for the knight. See? So you want to be mindful of this kind of ideas. You do not want to guard this trade this bishop. This bishop is guarding the key dark squares. So that's why, black should also consider at some point maybe h6. Maybe like cd, and maybe like h6 or something, I don't know. To defend the g5 square, and then bishop e7 castle, or d6, or... I mean, we also have a bishop b4 idea with tempo and castle. Yeah, but yeah. Anyway, this is something to think about, right? h6 to prevent the trade over bishops. But okay, bishop e7, yeah, again, black would have just played cd to prevent c4. Again, black did not apply prophylactic thinking. So c4, okay. But I mean, d5 doesn't work, right? a3 here, I mean, black just takes. Yeah, black just takes. So like I said, maybe a little bit premature for white. I think maybe white should have played, they should have maybe like move a bishop first, maybe like bishop f1 to open up this rook. And then, after some move, let's say here, then go c4, here, d5. And then white is just winning. Because now knight e5 is guarded by the knight and the rook. The knight moves, let's say, moves somewhere here, and then just d6. Double attack, game over, fork. Game over. So yeah, I think this would have been much more logical. Bishop f1 and then go for c4. Something like this. Of course, d3 is a much better diagonal, generally speaking. But see, in this case, if we want to play c4, d5, I mean, it may block our queen and the defense of a d5 pawn. So the d5 pawn will be less defended, But bishop d3 could also be an idea, but then not combined with c4. We play bishop d3, but then we again focus on the king side attack. So that would be another idea. But okay, let's see, here. So white just gives up a pawn. Maybe we'll have some compensation, we'll see. Okay, d. Okay, that's opening the game up. That's, I think, a good idea. Knight f3. Okay, I mean, d probably would have been fine. Right, d. Because takes, bishop f3. We have either just queen c7 at the very least, right? Or bishop takes f3. When if we take our queen, we just take on d1. And if we take here, we just take rook, checkmate. But okay, knight f3. So yeah, I think d probably would have been stronger, yes. Yeah, considering this variation, yeah, probably would have been the best, yeah, I suppose. But let's see, here, check, okay, good move. Yeah, now black cannot castle. So white may have some compensation. Ooh, bishop f4, oh, that's a pretty nice move. That's a pretty nice move. Queen c8, yeah, the point being that if queen takes f4, then bishop b7, double attack. Yeah, that is a good move by white. Queen c8, takes, knight c3. The king is weak, so we wanna, like, you know, move the king to f7, right? And develop the rook, but I mean, it hangs the e6 pawn. Maybe rook d8 also would have made sense, you know, to control the d file. Yeah, we just take here with pressure. Yeah, white has some serious pressure now. I mean, the pawns are equal, and the black's king is a bit weak. There's pressure on the e file. So overall, white has a clear initiative. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this opening analysis, some interesting principles. If so, if you enjoyed it, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.